I'm Tom Bedell with Breedlove and Bedell Guitars, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. This is a subject that's caused a lot of confusion and misunderstanding, and there are several acoustic guitar builders here. Bob Taylor from Taylor, Chris Martin, obviously from Martin, Bourgeois. What other guitar companies are here? So all of us, I know, at least the four of us from the States that build guitars, are all strong advocates for Lacey, strong advocates for CITES. We see it as a benefit to future generations and making sure that these wonderful, beautiful tonewood trees are around for our kids and grandkids to make guitars out of. So we're not here to in any way, I think I can speak for you guys, to in any way badmouth this government policy. Rather, we're excited for all of us to really learn how it works and why it's important. And there's a lot of people that have been learning a lot, but probably the most knowledgeable person in the world on understanding the European regulations, the American regulations, and really worldwide regulations would be Luisa Willsher. And she very generously offered to put on a workshop and share with us what the rules and policies are. And I know that after her talk, she's pleased to, I think, take questions and so forth. Just as proof, because when Luisa's company has sold several of us, maybe all of us in here, Brazilian rosewood over the years. Their company has specialized in Brazilian rosewood for over 50 years. And when we announced that we had Brazilian rosewood that our distributors in Europe could buy, every one of them said, no, you can't. You can't bring that into Europe. And in fact, you can, and as proof of that, I brought this into Europe for this show. This is Brazilian rosewood that we sourced through Luisa. I had no trouble getting the CITES permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service, getting it approved from the Department of Agriculture, and going through the German customs and having them stamp receipt of this instrument. So if somebody tells you you can't make Brazilian rosewood into Germany, here's proof that that's not the case. And Luisa's going to explain to us how all that works. Luisa?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for inviting me here today. It's a great pleasure. So, CITES. This is what we're here to talk about. What is CITES? I think that most of you know what CITES is, but for those of you who don't, it's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. It came into force in 1975, for those of you who are not familiar with it. And how does it work? Basically, it requires international cooperation aiming to protect certain species from excessive exploitation. This is how it's described officially. It protects over 30,000 species, 5,000 more or less of animals and 28,000 of plants. But that doesn't just include the specimens that are live. It includes seeds, dried herbs, fur coats, and guitars. So CITES is divided into 3 appendices. And it depends what protection they need. The species is put into 1, 2, or 3. So let's go through quickly each of the appendices before we go on to Brazilian rosewood. Appendix 3. This contains species that are protected in at least one country. And it's that country that asks the other CITES parties for assistance in controlling the trade. For example, USA asks for assistance from the other countries in the parties for assistance with Bractomys SPP, which is just the general tortoise species. And other countries like Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, Guatemala, and Peru have all asked for assistance with Cedrela odorata. Cedrela odorata is used on classical guitars for necks, some acoustic guitars, even some solid bodies. So some of you might actually use Cedrela odorata and are familiar that it needs a CITES 3 permit. Appendix 2. This includes species that aren't necessarily threatened, but they need their trade to be controlled. Often just to know exactly how much is being imported and exported. So then they can decide, really, is it becoming extinct, and if they need to put it up into CITES 1. So an example, crocodiles. All crocodiles are in CITES 2. And, as from last year, Madagascar rosewood. And then we have Appendix 1. This includes species that are threatened with extinction. And trade is only permitted in exceptional circumstances, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So a perfect example that we all know is ivory, and of course Brazilian rosewood. So which species are listed in CITES that we use in our industry? In Appendix 3, which is in Annex C in the European regulation, we've got Spanish cedar, as I mentioned before. But it has an annotation next to it. It says, Annotation 5, and if you look down right to the end of the CITES law, it says, logs, sawnwood, and veneer sheets. Okay, they're very important, the annotations on these CITES laws. So what does this mean? It means that a permit is only required for the export and import of logs, sawnwood, and veneer sheets of Cedrela odorata. So you need a permit to export from Madrid to the US for a block of Cedrela odorata. You do not need a CITES permit to export a guitar with a cedar neck, with a Cedrela odorata neck, to export it from Madrid to the United States, because it's not in logs, sawnwood, and veneer sheets form. Okay, in Appendix 2, in Annex B of the European regulation. 2 new examples that were put in June last year. Madagascar rosewood, and this is all species of Dalbergia or from Madagascar, that grow in Madagascar. And all species of Diospyros from Madagascar, that are grown in Madagascar. Again, Annotation 5, logs, sawnwood, and veneer sheets. So what does it mean? You only need a permit for logs, sawnwood, and veneer sheets. Sorry to be so repetitive, but we have to get this clear. You do not need a CITES permit for a guitar made of Madagascar rosewood. Madagascar rosewood. A fingerboard, it's a slab of wood. If I send this to the United States, it needs a CITES permit. This is a finished fingerboard. It's actually a fingerboard. It's been shaped, it's been slotted. We don't need a CITES permit to send this to the United States. Another couple of species that are in Appendix 2, which is the Annex B of the European regulation, is American mahogany, cocobolo, and Honduras rosewood. They're all in CITES 2 as well. Now this time, instead of having an annotation 5, they've got an annotation 6. This means logs, sawnwood, veneer sheets, and plywood. The only difference is that you need a CITES permit to export and import, logs, sawnwood, veneer, and plywood. A guitar made of Madagascar rosewood, even if it's made of Madagascar rosewood plywood, does not require a CITES permit. I've often had a call from a client, my guitar's stuck in customs and the CITES authorities say that I need a CITES permit. They have 33,000 species to know what to do in every occasion. They often do make mistakes, often. So we just have to say, no, that species actually has an annotation after it. We don't need a CITES permit to export or import that species because it's a finished product. I don't know if any of you are in the violin industry, but Pernambuco is also in CITES 2, but it has an annotation 10. This actually specifies that you need a permit for, the annotation is for logs, sawnwood, veneer, and parts for making, I think it says violin bows or musical instrument bows. So it's actually saying that the piece that is called a requa, that's like this shape, that needs a permit. But once it's transformed into a violin bow, it doesn't need a permit. And then we have Appendix 1, Annex A of the European regulation, Brazilian rosewood. And it always needs a permit. Always, always, always. In the United States it's different, but I'm going to talk about Europe now, which is why we're here today. you need a permit to sell it to your next door neighbor. You need a permit to do absolutely anything and everything with it. Okay, and we'll go on to the permits later. The big question, is it possible to import into the EU a guitar made of Brazilian rosewood? And as Tom said before, yes it is. It is possible. Now I'm going to go over a bit the law with you. Obviously this is language that's a bit more complicated, so I'll try and say it as slowly and clearly as possible. This is the EU Regulation 33897. It came into force in 1997. It does say, the law does say, that you are only allowed to import Brazilian rosewood if the management authority is satisfied that the specimen is not to be used for primarily commercial purposes. It does say that. So they are right when they start saying, no, you can't import it for trade. But Article 8.3a, let's remember that article, 8.3a, it says, in accordance with the requirements of other community legislation on the conservation of wild fauna and flora, exemption from the prohibition referred to in paragraph 1 may be granted by issuance of a certificate to that effect by a management authority of the member state in which specimens are located on a case-by-case basis where a. the specimens were acquired in or introduced into the community before the provisions relating to the species listed in Appendix 1 to the Convention, or in Annex C1 to the Regulation EEC, or in Annex A, became applicable to the specimens. What does that mean? If the wood was in Europe in 1992, and obviously declared legal, it can come back into Europe. So if there was wood that came from a supplier in Spain, such as Madinter, and it was sent to a company, such as Taylor Guitars, in 2001, you can make it into a guitar and you can send it back into Europe. This exemption says it, Article 8.3a. There's also another article that can be of help, but obviously the first article is perfectly clear. But this one also says that the conditions for the issuance of an import permit, as referred to in paragraph 1a and 1d, shall not apply to specimens for which the applicant provides documentary evidence that they have been previously legally introduced or acquired in the community, modified or not. So if Taylor Guitars decided to send that wood back without making it into a guitar, they can, because it started in Europe in 1992. Okay, just so you know that law that we're exempt from is again that law. The management authority certified that specimens is not to be used for primarily commercial purposes. So that does not apply to wood that started off in Europe in 1992. And that's how Tom got the guitar into Europe yesterday, or the day before yesterday. Okay. Just in case there are people who deal with antique guitars here, there is another exception. The one we were talking about before was Article 3A. But there's another exception, which is 3B, and it says that the specimens are worked specimens that are acquired more than 50 years previously. I didn't bring out the whole law, we'd have to go through every single definition. Work specimens is something that has been made into something. It's a product, it's a finished product. For example, a fur coat or a guitar. So, another exception to a specimen that can be re-imported into Europe is something that has been made into something, a guitar, and it was acquired more than 50 years previously to this law. This law is from 1997. So if you have an antique guitar that's from 1947 and you can prove it, then it's exempt and you can bring it into Europe. So this is the law that we've been talking about. Now the law's all very well, but it's always better to actually see the real thing and see the proof. So here we have some proof. This is an export certificate from the United States. As you can see, this says T. The T means trade. There are other reasons why you can get a permit: for scientific reasons, for reproduction reasons. There are 5 or 6 reasons why you can get a permit. But this says purpose of transaction, trade. Okay, and it says, it doesn't say an export permit, it doesn't say a re-export permit. It says other certificates. See block 9. Let's go down to block 9. What kind of permit is it? It's a pre-convention. Wood was imported from Spain under CITES. Now we read through the CITES numbers that were used in 2001 and 2002 and 2001 again. But it's saying the wood was imported. It's actually saying here, this wood was imported into the United States in 2001. And this is the number. 13 from the year 2013. US, because it was the US permit, 99786. That's their export permit from Taylor. And this is an import permit for the company or person who imported it into the Netherlands in 2013. It's an import permit. You can see up there it actually does say import. Okay, 2013, the Netherlands. And look, here's the number. It's the same number. It's saying we're importing it on this number, 99786. It's definitely a good idea to follow through with all the numbers. Make sure that you're declaring that it's actually corresponding to the other CITES permit. So if they ever have any doubts, you can say, yes, but look, this was the permit that was imported. I have proof that it already came into the United States from Europe after 1992. Okay, so here's another example from a German import. Again, it's from Taylor Guitars. Again, you can see here, T for trade. It's a trade certificate. Okay? So when we think that the law says you cannot bring Brazilian rosewood into Europe for trade purposes, for commercial purposes, here we have another certificate. 2013, a trade certificate. Okay? It's from Germany. And it says here, used Dalbergia Negro wood has been acquired and for the first time imported into the EU prior 1992. See books 13. Now, I like the certificate way more because it helps us a lot. The exemption from the prohibition sale is granted according to 8.3a. I would definitely use that when applying, because you're the people who actually fill in the boxes, you fill in your application form. I would definitely just somewhere on the form, in observations, each form is different when you apply for it in different countries, but I would definitely mention it can be imported thanks to, however we write it, according to Article 8.3a of the Regulation 33897, which is the regulation we've been looking at before. So it works. We've seen the law, we've read it, we can do it. And we've seen some examples just from last year. It can be done, apart from Tom's experience this week. Okay, the next law. This law is the implementing regulation. It tells you the rules of how to comply with 33897. Okay? So let's see what we have to do. How do we import? It's all very well me telling you the law works and that Taylor and Breedlove have done it, but the best thing to do is to know how to do it. Unfortunately, I have to say that CITES does not have a great system of documents. It doesn't say, fill out form ABC 123. It doesn't have any numbers on their forms. But anyway, you'll see that each form has a name, and it's indicated in the law. So, first one up here, I've given a little map of Europe. The arrows have kind of disappeared a bit, but it was an arrow in and out of Europe. Okay? The forms on which import permits, export permits, re-export certificates, personal ownership certificates, and sample collection certificates, and applications for such documents shall conform, except as regards space reserved for national use, to the model set out in Annex 1. That means that if you want to import a guitar into Europe, reminder, the wood must have started in Europe in 1992. If you want to import a guitar made of Brazilian rosewood, you need the form that's indicated in Annex 1, which is this one. Okay, it's a European Union permit certificate, just like the ones we saw before, that were filled in. And you'll fill in one of these boxes. 2, I haven't mentioned. The forms here are number 2. They're reserved for national uses, and they're import notifications. It's just for CITES 2 and 3 when you're importing cedula odorata into Europe as wood. Okay, so we don't need to talk about that today. Number 3, the forms in which travelling exhibition certificates and applications for such documents are drawn up shall conform to the model set out in Annex 3. Okay, this is the form that Tom applied for Breedlove guitars. To bring the guitar to this exhibition, it's a travelling exhibition certificate. He applied for one of those. It was simple, they can tell you all about it. And this is what you need for a travelling exhibition certificate. You need this to move within Europe as well. It doesn't have to be stamped, but you need it to travel within Europe, okay? 4 are just continuation sheets, so we don't need those either, because I don't know how many guitars you'll be travelling with at one time, but we won't talk about those. Number 5, the forms on which certificates provided for in paragraphs. And here we go down to Article 8.3. Okay? Are drawn up shall conform to the model set out in Annex 5. So this is the document that you need for when you sell a guitar to another shop. You sell a guitar to an end user. This is the document you need in Annex 5, which is why I put a little logo of a music shop up there. It's the certificate you need to actually sell it from your distributor to your dealer, from your dealer to the shop to the end user. You need this certificate. Now I put this example here in the hope that we would have the certificates in time, but we didn't, I'm sorry. This is the certificate that corresponds to the re-exportation of the Brazilian rosewood, part of the Brazilian rosewood that we sold to old hippies, to Breedlove guitars. And what I would have liked to have done is to have actually shown these documents proving that it was done last week, okay? But they're here, you can look through them, proving that just this week. It's funny, it even says the name of the guitar, the model of the guitar, the serial number. It's all proven here in this document. And this is the permit they applied for. And here we actually have the stamp that they got when they left the airport in JFK. And here's the stamp when he came into the airport in Germany, in Frankfurt. It works, and it's easy. It isn't as hard as it seems. So where do you apply for your permits? Now that's more complicated for me to give you that information, because every single country of the CITES parties has their own authority. US, it's US Fish and Wildlife. Spain, Soibre. Every single country has a different administration to give you your CITES permit. So I've given you this webpage if anyone wants to write it down. It's where you will actually find the address, the phone numbers of all the CITES authorities in your countries. And so the CITES webpage, cites.org, and then you have to find your own country. So again, it's easy, it can be done. It's easy, it's not as complicated as it all seems. You have a guitar and you want to import it into Europe, apply for this certificate, an import certificate. Don't forget to mention the Article 8.3a. You're exempt of the law. You can import the guitar. You want to travel your certificate, a traveling certificate. It's easy, and you can travel several times. You can see there are lots of boxes here. And as I say, as the law mentioned before, you get extra pages, and it lasts 3 years. And Annex 5 is your certificate for buying and selling the guitar within Europe. You sell it to your neighbor, you need a permit. Even if it's your neighbor. You sell it to the next shop, you need a permit. One thing I forgot to mention about this certificate is it needs to be always carried by the owner or someone who is part of the company. You can't actually just say, hey, I'll lend you my guitar. I mean, I don't think you do that with a Brazilian rosewood guitar, but anyway. I'll lend you my guitar, off you go, and here's the permit. You have to have your passport with you. You need your passport stamped. Something else that I'd like to mention here. If you're traveling with this certificate, let me go back, this certificate, let's give an example of this guitar right here. This guitar is here and it belongs to Breedlove. If they sell it at the show, someone's interested in it, they can't sell it here. They have to go back home with a traveling certificate and apply for an export permit. One of these. Okay? You can't sell it here at the show because you don't have a permit. You have to take the guitar back home, then apply for an export permit. Your client has to apply for an import permit, and then you can sell the guitar. You cannot sell the guitar while it's on a traveling exhibition certificate. Okay? Very important.
What happens when the guitar gets stolen?
What happens when the guitar gets stolen? I don't have any experience with that, but I'm sure if you have a police record, you know, you go to the police and you get, I don't know, a certificate of however they do it, of a report of a theft. I'm sure you can go to your CITES authorities and prove that it was stolen, and they'll remove that number from their system. They'll have some way of doing it. I don't have the experience, fortunately. I hope no one else does. But if you do, I would believe that that's the way it would happen, just like if you get your passport stolen. It's cancelled. So I would have thought that would happen, but I don't have any personal experience. But I'm sure your CITES authority can help you with that. They probably do have experience with something that's being stolen, just like when something dies. Animals die. So I'm not an expert in animals, so I don't know, but animals do die, and I'm sure they must have some kind of way in their system of saying deceased and no longer exists. So anyway, this is the information on the slide. You have access to it on this web page down here. And if you have any questions, fire away.
What about old guitars?
I'm sorry?
What about old guitars? For instance, D28 from year 56. If I want to sell it, what should I do?
Okay, as I said before, there are two exemptions. One is that one of the exemptions is that if the wood was turned into a guitar over 50 years ago before this law, then it can come back into Europe. Okay? Apart from that, if it was never in Europe in 1992, it can't come back into Europe.
Yeah.
So if it was the 50 years before this law was 1947. If the guitar was made in 1948 and has ever been into Europe, it can't come into Europe.
But I have to prove it somehow.
Yes, now that's a common question. How do I prove that a guitar or wood is pre-convention? Okay, to start with, in 1992, if you had Brazilian rosewood, you had to declare it. You had to inform your authorities, at least in Europe. We had 2 years to do it. We had 2 years to actually do it and finalize the stock taking and everything. If you didn't do it, officially, it's your problem you didn't do it. But they do accept it if you can prove it. Now, what is if you can prove it, what you can't prove? It's actually the CITES authority's decision. Okay? So you might be lucky that you get with the right person and the right CITES authorities and they believe your proof. That you sit there and you go, but look, I have an invoice from this company and they sold me the wood in 1990, but I forgot to declare it. I didn't know how to declare it.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to prove it in some way.
Yeah, but if we are talking about a guitar from the 50s, I don't have been invoiced.
Okay, now a guitar, often they will use, in Spain at least, they use someone who has a lot of knowledge and very well renowned in the industry of antique instruments, and they use him to certify. But obviously there must be no personal relationship between you, and they use that kind of person to certify that the guitar is antique.
So if I buy a vintage guitar at George Groom Music, and it was built in the 1960s, and it has rosewood, but it wasn't in Europe, I can't bring it to Europe.
No.
And he can't sell it in Europe.
No.
So that really does restrict the...
It restricts so many things. It has to have started off in Europe in 1992. It has to have started in Europe in 1992. Only 2 exemptions. It started off in 1992, but it was made into a guitar 50 years before this law, which was 1947, the 50 years before, the law was 1997. So no, George Gruen sells you a guitar, or he wants to sell a guitar to Europe. If it didn't start in Europe, they won't let you in again.
So I got a Hofner from 1963 with a Rosewood fingerboard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a musician. What happens when I travel with that guitar?
Okay, now officially right now there's a traveling exhibition certificate. Okay, now you need to apply for one of those and do what two of these did, was use this, and every time you come in and out, they'll stamp that at customs. But you need it even if you're not traveling through customs, you need to carry it with you.
Yeah.
When you go through customs, they'll stamp it, and you must go and stamp it.
But it has to be proved again that it is definitely from...
You have this, you have your certificate, so you don't have to prove it again. Once you've got your certificate, you're fine.
Okay.
It's the importing part, the first import to actually import here in Europe is the difficult part.
Yeah.
Not difficult, I mean it's not actually difficult, you just need a permit. And you apply for the permit just like I said, showing that this corresponds to, just like the Taylor Guitars certificate said.
Yeah.
It's exempt from the law according to Article 383A because it was exported from Spain to the United States in 2001, 2002.
At the bottom of that permit, it says 1992, pre-1992.
Yeah, prior to June 11th, 1992, which was the day that the Brazilian Rosewood went into CITES.
So we had to prove to the Fish and Wildlife Service the documentation to verify that before they would issue that permit.
But it's easy because they have an import permit from Madinter. It's easy. As long as you've got your permits, it really isn't that hard. It's a piece of paper. You just have to wait for the authorities to give it to you and get them to stamp. But if you have all the permits, you have all the papers, they can't say no. They often say no at the beginning. They'll say, oh no, you can't import the CITES one into Europe. That's the first answer always, right? Because they see the main law. And then you go, yeah, but Article 8.3a says that if it started in Europe in 1992, it can come back into Europe. Then you can go in and out with this certificate as many times as you want. During 3 years, and then you can get your next one and your next one. Traveling certificate. Traveling exhibition certificate. Just a second. Now there is a guitar passport. It's something that it's relatively new. It came into force on June the 12th, 2013. But I have to confess, they've never actually given one yet. Okay? They don't actually know what it's for. We've asked authorities, we've got letters, and the last one was, well, we think it applies to musicians traveling for personal use only. Now, I don't have direct connection with musicians, but from the information I received directly from Fish and Wildlife in DC, they haven't issued one yet. Okay? So I'm sorry we can't be any further help with that, but they haven't done it yet. Shodan.
Yeah, what if the wood didn't come through Europe? Like it has CITES, but the...
You bought the wood from Brazil.
Yeah, from
It's never
Brazil.
been in Europe. You can't import that guitar into Europe. Full stop. End of it. The law 338/97 says that you cannot import a CITES 1 species into Europe. And then there are exemptions, but that isn't one exemption. It has to have started off in Europe in 1992.
If you have old stock rosewood, many years old, how do you stand with that to prove? I mean, I have no receipts for it, but how do you stand to...
Extremely difficult.
Yeah.
We have had a personal experience, Taylor Guitars and Madinter, with a wood that was proven to be legally imported into the US. We imported it into the US in 2001, and we had it in the US, and then we wanted to sell it to Taylor Guitars 2 years ago. We were missing one little document with a signature, and we fought incredibly hard, and it was extremely difficult to get them to acknowledge that it was legal, and we had all the proof in the world. They say that if you can prove it, they actually say, even with just a photograph from the year, let's say the year 1920s, if you could just put a photograph next to your pile of wood, then we'll accept that as proof. But we haven't seen it happen, and we had a hard time getting this wood proven legal and get its permits. So that is something that
But we
depends. We did.
So they do it.
They do.
It's just, you just have to work.
You have to do it really hard, but every single administration is different. Okay, so that's our experience with the administration in the US. Every single cited authorities is different, and as I say, it depends on the person and the authorities, unfortunately.
I'm talking about within Europe, you know.
But it depends on, I don't know if, the German authorities, if you're applying to Germany, or the Spanish authorities, if you're applying to Spain. But it depends on those authorities, and then what they consider proof. Okay. It can be done, like Rob says, it can be done. But I think they're more scared to do it than not. They're very fearful because, it's a big responsibility to prove something legal, to accept that they think it's really legal and it's prior to a date.
Lisa, this may be beyond the scope of the seminar, and if it is, I apologize, but the EU law that prevents any Brazilian rosewood after the 1992 convention, how is that different than, for example, other countries that trade in Japan, for example, or America, Canada, other areas where there is significant desire for musical instruments with Brazilian rosewood? Are you familiar with?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with all the laws in the world. The EU is actually easier because we're a lot of countries put together. So I can talk for a number of countries. I don't know the laws in Japan. From my experience, I think they don't have something as strict as this. The EU is renowned for having strict laws. But the CITES law always applies. Okay, what we talked about at the beginning of when you need a permit and when you don't, and which species need a permit and in what form. We talked about logs, sawwood, guitars. They do apply with the countries within the parties. If you're shipping to a country which isn't a party, which I believe North Korea is not one of the parties. China is a party. North Korea isn't a party. You need your permit to export. Don't forget to do your permit to export, or you're doing contraband.
You sell a lot of guitars in North Korea.
They all look at one guy.